All right, let's get right to it. Coming to you from 4,200 feet in the hills of Oregon, it is time for another bonus episode of the MOA broadcast. Today's topic are serrations for sissies. Now, just briefly, this is a bonus episode of the Make It Out Alive broadcast. This goes out first as a radio show in Southern Oregon, and then it goes out as a podcast all over the internet. So whether you get it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, our Patreon page, which I strongly encourage you to check out, it's free. There is paid content, but the vast majority of it is all free. But this is a small bonus episode we'd like to drop in between the larger weekly episode of the Make It Out Alive broadcast. So, a lot of these episodes, in fact, all these episodes that I've dropped in the last week or two, have been covered pretty extensively on the Make It Out Alive, the MOA broadcast. But I like to try and get some of the more salient ones and those that pertain particularly to the outdoors and do a shorter video version, because that's what folks like to talk about. And here on YouTube and other platforms, we also have the ability to have a good platform for comments and so forth. So the question, are serrations for sissies? Now, if you go on the forums, one of the reasons I don't spend a lot of time on more of the forums these days, whether it's for outdoor stuff or knives or other gear, people just love to argue. I'm not talking debate and discuss things. They love to argue. It's like politicians. No matter how much proof, no matter how much factual data you provide to people on most of these forums, most of them will never concede that a point is either right or wrong. And I'm just talking, not just talking about myself, anyone. No one will concede and that someone is right or wrong. And if no one can be right or wrong, then you can't move forward in a discussion, because like it or not, words mean things. And when you're talking about technical data like knives, like metallurgy and heat treat and edge geometry and so forth, it's just like in machining or the aviation world. Specifics matter, and they matter a lot. So anyway, that kind of discourages conversation. And unfortunately, guys, I'm sorry, a lot of them are the boomers. And I tell you before, and I hate to marginalize that group, because we should be looking to people of older age or more advanced age, and the experience they bring to the table as a valuable thing. But unfortunately, a lot of these boomers, at least the ones that wind up on forums, they're almost impossible to deal with. They make everything a very personal thing, and they refuse to absolutely to ever concede a point or to reach a common ground. They don't ever want to be wrong, and so we're all wrong. I'm wrong from time to time. You're wrong from time to time. It is what it is. But anyway, let's get right to the point here. Let me get a sip of my coffee. Okay. Are serrations for sissies? This is one that comes up, and I've covered this a number of times on the MOA broadcast as well. When it comes up on forums, it typically gets distorted and twisted. I'm filming in the shop, and there's a bunch. It's a busy time of day, so there's people driving by. If you hear road noise, that's what's going on. This is one that gets typically distorted very badly in discussion. It's not a question for a lot of people, whether or not serrations are handy, whether or not they're useful, whether or not they are productive in certain situations. It typically boils down really quickly to an us versus them type of discussion. Those that just don't like serrations and those that do. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and lay a couple of facts out there first, and then we can get into the opinion side of it. And let me start off like I always say in these discussions. Buy whatever you want. You are a grown man or woman or whatever you are. You've got autonomy. I'm not your daddy. You don't need my approval, and my opinion doesn't really count for much. But if you're here for content, that's what I'm giving you, and we're going to discuss my opinion along with some actual facts. Serrations are more advantageous than a plain edge blade in a lot of situations. The simple fact of the matter is, on a plain edge blade, meaning we're not talking about saw teeth here, we're talking about serrations, like a serrated steak knife or the serrations you would find on Spyderco, Benchmade, Cold Steel, any type of knife, even homemade serrations. They will outcut and outlast a plain edge blade, period. In almost every situation. That is not up for debate. Let's prove it. I've worked in a variety of jobs over the years, and one of the things I used to do when working around landscaping is planting trees and shrubs and bushes and such. When you take a small tree bulb and it's covered in the burlap sack or whatever you want to call that, the burlap cloth around there, sometimes you have to cut that off to expose the roots and such. When you take a plain edge blade, and I've done this with crappy gas station knives, I've done it with high performance custom knives. When you cut that silt and clay infused burlap with a plain edge knife, frequently it's practically dull by the time you get all the way around the circumference. When you get done circumcising that tree bulb, the blade, the edge is dead. It's dull. And it cannot cut anymore. You can sit there and saw and saw and saw, but you're not going to cut much with a plain edge without presenting a dangerous situation. Do that same thing with a serrated blade, and you'll be able to go all day. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be the cleanest cut, but who cares? It's going in the ground, right? And this seems to be one of the main sticking points in this debate that comes up when people talk about whether or not serrated edges are better or plain edges are better. Especially the boomers, these guys that are hung up on having a straight edge blade, I guess they have this weird fantasy of like Rambo or that movie with Anthony Hopkins, The Edge, where they're just gonna, what do I have on me? I don't have a pocket knife handy. They have this fantasy of where they're just gonna like hold this straight edge blade and like look into the fire, and it's gonna be, it's gonna be so powerful. And I got this big Bowie knife or whatever it is, and it looks the sun or the firelight's going to gleam off the mirror polished edge, and they're gonna feel so dangerous and so big and bad. That has very little to do with reality, okay? But they come from this bizarre place, and they'll always say, well, I'll bet my sharp plain edge blade against your serrated blade any day of the week. What is that? That's not the point. That's not the discussion that we're having. It's can serrations, are they more beneficial in certain situations than a plain edge blade? The answer is absolutely yes. Now, will they produce the same type of perfectly smooth cut that a sharp plain edge blade will? Of course not. They can in certain situations, but in general, they're not going to. One of the other big problems people have is they say, well, serrations are harder to sharpen. Okay, you're conflating issues now. Harder to sharpen has nothing to do with which one can perform better or last longer. Okay? Why do serrations continue to cut after a plain edge gets dull? It's very simple. Serrations do two things primarily. Okay? By having those scallop serrations, what happens is you're actually extending or lengthening the usable overall length of the edge. Okay? Because if you were to straighten out those serrations, the blade would now be longer. But what really does it, what primarily makes serrations so dominant when it comes to cutting, especially after they become dull, is the different types of tips and the edge that it has, the style of serration. Because it's just like a saw. Long after the actual edge is dull, the sharp, jagged teeth of serrations will continue to rip and tear. It's not debatable. That is a fact. It's reality. If you ever want to have a cutting contest with someone, let's get some zip ties, let's get some burlap, and let's get some PVC and a few other rough things, and I guarantee you the plain edge knife will be cooked in a few minutes, and that serrated blade will continue to cut. I know because I've done it. It's nothing personal. If you don't like serrated edges, don't buy them. I wouldn't want anyone to buy a knife or a tool that they don't like. But if you don't believe they have a place, and if you don't think that they will outcut and outlast a plain edge blade in many situations, you're dumb, probably. I don't know. I don't know how else you can take in all this data and not reconcile that with reality. If you want to live in your own la-la land, that's great too. I encourage you to be happy. But you're not living in reality, and that's what we're talking about. So, does that mean serrations are the only way to go? Of course not. I would say the vast majority of knives that I own and carry on a regular basis don't have serrations. I get questions, why don't my knives that I make have serrations? The simple answer is the majority of people that are spending the higher dollars on custom or high-end mid-tech knives don't want serrations. And that's fine too. At some point, like I've mentioned before in these discussions, you've got to ask yourself a question. Do you want to be right, or do you want to make money? And there's nothing unethical or immoral about that. If you're trying to sell a product that no one wants, you're not going to stick around very long. If you have a product that people do want but maybe isn't your favorite, who cares? You're not there to be friends with every single transaction. You are there to provide people what they want. You want to be a willing seller, encountering a willing buyer, and then giving them what they want, and they give you money, and you move on. As far as being harder to sharpen, I don't know that this is really true anymore. We have so many tools now that make the sharpening of serrations, honestly, very, very easy. The easiest way I can think of, and the one that I typically use, unless I'm in the shop where I do have some specialized equipment, is I will take a bamboo skewer like whenever you're making shish kebabs, and I will wrap some 320, 400 grit sandpaper on there, and then just wrap it around nice and tight, and then you will just mate the serration up to that in a few passes, and then boom, those serrations are sharp again, frequently to the point where they will slice paper. Then you want to give them a good strop on either your like denim pants or your work pants leg. I have several different types of power strops of both leather and other materials in the shop. That really makes a big difference. If you can safely and know how to buff them with a variety of materials, whether it's compound or whatever, that does a great job as well. But at the very least, you want to strap them on your pants leg, some leather, maybe even some cardboard, and that's going to get your edge restored very quickly and very easily. And if you can't sharpen your own knife, then really you should probably be focused on learning how to do that than getting into a debate on whether or not serrations are useful or not, or buying more gear. This used to be a skill that was, I wouldn't say almost universal, but people knew how to maintain their tools. And I'm sure some people are going to get butthurt about saying that, but if you are out there spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on knives and you can't even sharpen your own knives, it may be time to look at that situation and remedy that before you continue, or at least before you want to argue with people about how the reality of edges and so forth work. And I'm sure some people are going to think this is, this isn't going to make them feel good deep down inside in that special place they don't talk about, that Wilson is being a little hard or a little condescending. Guys, I have had these discussions literally dozens and in some cases hundreds of times over the years. And to people that really want to know the truth, these aren't controversial things. When you show them some simple facts and data, they understand this and they move on. It's usually only people that are typically upset or insecure or have a really strongly non-reality based or rooted preference in the first place that don't like being told something that they don't believe or don't want to hear. And like I've always said, if I'm wrong, prove it to me. If you can prove me wrong and help me correct my statements or my situation, you've done me a favor. So there we go. That's going to cover today's bonus episode. And to answer the question, no, serrations are not for sissies. But the made-up myth that they are is. Stay safe out there, folks.